Taking time for your health. The African American Wellness Watch. Trusted information for us, by us. Dr. Mike Lenore and other experts from around the country and around the world have the latest on how you and your family can get healthy and stay well. It's time for the African American Wellness Watch. During this month, we've tried to put the health disparities that we know all about into some perspective, frankly, a historical perspective. That race plays a role in medical decision-making is not new. That Blacks don't want to participate in medical experimentation is not new. But our hope is that understanding the historical roots to health disparities might drive us to finding solutions more quickly. We have leaned on the great work from the Healthcare Policy Foundation, KFF, formerly the Kaiser Family Foundation, and frankly, one of its chief vice presidents, Samantha Artiga. And of course, we've leaned on our host, Dr. Mike Lenore, who frankly suggests that maybe the first thing we might do to address health disparities is find a way to get more Black doctors.
Well, I think we have about the same percentage of physicians, Black physicians, as we did 100 years ago when the National Medical Association was founded. Another number of dynamics go into that. I think too often that the road to medicine is more difficult for the underserved and people of color simply because they don't have role models early on. They don't have mentors as they go along. And so consequently, the path through from high school through to medical school can be very lonely. I went to the University of Texas, where we had about 3 African Americans in my class, 3 Jewish students and 3 Mexican students. And so consequently, most of my journey to medicine was taken without the benefit of some of the ancillary resources that other people had. So that's one thing. I think second, there was an age of affirmative action when people started to look at what makes a good doctor. It may not be the highest grade on the MCAT. In fact, it may not even be the number 1 person who graduates in the class who has the most successful practice. Because medicine is as much an art as it is a science. The body is a very, very capable organ system, being able to heal itself of many of the common problems that people face. There is another study that suggests if you have a Black doctor in a Black community, the level of care for Black people outcomes go up. So we faced all of that. And I don't see that as improving right away unless we have a new structure. When I first started practicing here in Oakland, there were 135 physicians, Black physicians in practice, many of them in communities that needed them the most. East Oakland, West Oakland, San Francisco, the Mission and Hunters Point, and also the Fillmore. Now there are probably 5 African Americans practicing outside in major health plans like UCSF or Stanford or Sutter or Kaiser. And those 5 are probably pretty much overwhelmed. There are a number of people who don't want to go into these health systems, and they don't have many options. So in terms of resources, we are not much better than we were 100 years ago. And secondly, I don't see the problem. I don't know what the problem's going to look like, George, since the Supreme Court decision.
Ms. Artiga, I know that the KFF, formerly the Kaiser Family Foundation, has done a lot of research in this and look back at some of the historical roots to the fact that we don't have an awful lot of African-American physicians now. Share some of that research with us, would you?
Yeah, so in addition to all the factors that Dr. Lenore mentioned, there are also some historical actions that have contributed to the lack of diversity we see in the healthcare workforce overall. So if we look back prior to the desegregation of education, there were colleges and universities established to educate Black students. And by the late 19th century, there were 7 medical colleges that were focused on training Black doctors. We then in 1910 see a landmark report come out called the Flexner Report, which was funded by the American Medical Association and the Carnegie Foundation. And it assessed the state of medical education in the US and Canada at the time. One of the findings and recommendations from that report was to close all but 2 of those historically Black medical schools. And that resulted in just 2 surviving, Meharry Medical College and Howard University. In the wake of those closures, we saw the number of Black physicians decline. And despite actions in more recent years to really increase the diversity of medical students, Black physicians continue to remain underrepresented relative to their share of the population, as Dr. Lenoir has discussed in terms of what that looks like in Oakland. And as he mentioned, I think there are concerns that this problem may worsen going forward as a result of the 2023 Supreme Court ruling against the use of affirmative action policies in higher education.
And that lack of Black physicians has a direct impact on the quality of care that African Americans get, right?
Yeah, so we see research that shows us that having a provider that shares your racial and ethnic background makes a real difference. So in our recent 2023 survey, we saw that Black adults who had more healthcare visits with a provider who shared their racial or ethnic background reported having more positive provider interactions. There is other research that suggests that this patient-provider racial concordance is associated with lower emergency department use, increased use of preventive care, as well as decreased disparities in infant mortality. So this having a provider who shares your background does appear to make a difference in terms of both the quality of care you receive as well as health outcomes. We also see in that survey that Black adults are less likely than white adults to say they have most of their visits with a provider who shares their background and experience because of this underrepresentation in the healthcare workforce.
And that underrepresentation is exacerbated by other hurdles that would-be African-American doctors face, like fewer role models, fewer mentors, and over-reliance on racially biased admission examinations. But it's not just eliminating affirmative action that threatens our health. There's another Supreme Court ruling as well, the one that outlawed abortion. So where do we go from here? How do we make progress? How do we not just get so frustrated by the lack of progress that we just shut down and give up?
Yeah, I mean, I think this conversation is a really good example of where to start, and that's really being open and honest and reckoning with the role that racism continues to play in people's experiences and their health today, and recognizing that a lot of these events that occurred in the past continue to have lasting impacts today. So while some of those policies are no longer in place, many of the inequities we see across our systems remain rooted in those historic policies and actions. In addition, I think really shining a light on disparities and the impact that they have on people's lives. When we look at things like shortened life expectancy among Black Americans, again, just focusing on the inequities in the systems and the impacts of racism are shortening people's lives. So these have real impacts. I think when we saw those real impacts in the COVID-19 pandemic, that really opened a lot of people's eyes to these issues. And I think continuing to keep the focus there on those impacts is really important. I think also recognizing that while a lot of health is determined by what happens in the healthcare system, that a lot of factors outside the healthcare system, including social and economic factors, really play a major role in driving and shaping people's health. It's beyond the healthcare system's ability to address all those social and economic needs and inequities, but it's important to acknowledge and recognize them and figure out how the healthcare sector can collaborate and coordinate across sectors to better address many of those social and economic needs that also impact our health disparities. Those are just a few points I think I'd leave us with today.
Yeah, and I think we can continue to call out the issues that are important in these outcomes. Here again, it was a bit of an epiphany for me. My wife said it wasn't an epiphany. She said I was just paying attention. But it was an epiphany that so much of the poor outcomes that African Americans and other people of color face have to do with the system itself. I mean, if you look at all the data on hospital discrimination and unconscious bias in hospital situations and if you look at the situation for many Black people from the first person they encounter in a physician's office or a system of physicians' offices may be a kind of a disrespectful interaction, all the way through not wanting to spend time explaining conditions, not having an advocate, not navigating the system properly. I think those are things that can be corrected. Those are things that we can provide clarity to. Those are situations that we can give instructions for. And that's what we try to do through these programs and through the African American Wellness Projects, to get people those tools. Because I agree with you, Ms. Ortega, that it is a system-wide, kind of a national problem. We are #1 in health expenses and 37th in outcomes. And for African Americans, we may be 67th in outcomes, and we need to call attention to that. But then I believe, and I still believe, as I did 20 years ago when we started this, that to improve health equity starts from the bottom up. A community prepared to ask the necessary questions to get the kind of care that they need, and insisting and demanding that, not from the top down. I don't think a national health plan, I don't healthy people another time, any of that's going to change the dynamic unless we as a community understand that the kind of care we get can be substantive if you permit it. And that if you demand good quality health care, that it isn't, well, here's what I often say, that is, we as a people got as mad about health care that it's disrespectful, ineffective, inefficient, and sometimes dangerous, as when somebody cuts in front of us in the Safeway line, we wouldn't have this problem.
So that's it, bottom up and not top down. That's the direction towards success. So many of the tools that we can use can be found on the website of KFF. It's a one-of-a-kind resource. And also, you can find resources on our website at aawellnessproject.org. There we will also give you timely tips and health information as well. We hope that this month-long look at disparities through a historical lens will frankly encourage and empower you to get and stay well.
Together, and I'd like to thank those of you who've been watching our program to remember the African American Wellness always suggests health is your biggest asset.